Good morning, everyone. How is it going? Welcome to my next installment on Thoughts on Final Fantasy XIV. So, instead of just wrapping up one specific expansion, I wanted to kind of combine Stormblood and Shadowbringers into one neat little package, without spoilers, hopefully. Because, well, I'm doing the pre-patch lead up to Endwalker, and I just wrapped up basically the core problem that made up how we got the Shadowbringers initially from the end of Stormblood. So, the pieces are coming together. Let's wind back to Stormblood because, well, Stormblood had quite a lot going for it. Oh, sorry, make sure my mic wasn't muted. And I would say, in many respects, Stormblood indeed or has an argument for being one of the best expansions, and I can see where it also has the argument of not being the best expansion. So, uh, in terms of the abilities added to each class, I've mainly been playing Samurai, but I also have a really high level Bard. I'm starting to level up Gunbreaker. I'm kind of liking Death Knight, though I just started leveling Death Knights, but that was introduced back in Heaven's Word, so I haven't really spent a whole lot of time with it yet. I just started leveling Warrior so I can eventually get to Paladin because I just kind of want to know what the lore behind that class is and have another tank classes. I found I kind of have an affinity for tanking, and from what I understand, Shadowbringers changes made tanking somewhat easier than it had been previously, so I can't really speak on where it was. But I do know where it is. I like the feel of it because it makes me feel a lot less apprehensive about tanking. So I've been kind of doing it in random dungeon queues for lower level content. I don't think I'm quite trial ready yet, but for a regular dungeon, I think I'm pretty well okay. I just got to learn the mechanics of the dungeons more. But the story, um, well, Stormblood, without going into spoilers, it takes a it takes some of the seeds that were set up in A Realm Reborn, specifically related to Alamigo, and it finally expands on why that's a big deal. And or up until that point, I had this idea that the Empire was a more or less faraway threat and not really on the doorstep of Eorzea. I had this picture that they weren't going to be a real big problem. And then here comes the that whole ending where we're going to the wall that's at the eastern end of Eorzea, and all of a sudden, instead of being this faraway threat, they are literally on the doorstep, and they've been there the whole time, but you don't really see that. That's not really a big spoiler, so I don't mind revealing that. But or what you do afterwards kind of puts it in a bit greater context, and then you find that or there's an enemy that quite literally or runs over you like you are a stick on a piece of road. Like you just can't compete, so you kind of have to rethink. And then, or when or Yugiri comes in, and when she speaks of having to flee her homeland, and then they go right back before the expansion starts, then it makes sense why they're important because they're facing the exact same problem. But they're a little bit easier to get into because, the circumstances are different in that part of the world. So you go over there, you learn about the people that live there, and I have to say the Ara tribes in particular, the Dolthar, easily my favorite tribe of Ara, simply because they thrive on combat. They literally live and breathe combat, and they believe in reincarnation. And have made some very interesting stories. I want to go back there and finish up the storylines just to know how they ended. They're that good, in my opinion. And the other Aura, they all have interesting stories too, like the Mole being more nomadic. And through your help, they achieved something that they rightfully didn't think they ever would be able to achieve, at least not in their lifetimes. And again, I'm not going to spoil it, but it'll make sense when you play the story. And you end up, or freeing them like you end up freeing Alamigo. And that's a predictable part of the story. And it sets the tone for a united front against the Empire. Basically, the world united against the Empire, which is unprecedented within recent memory. And the the main villain of the expansion doesn't really seem to care about much except for fighting you, which is an interesting take for a villain, I think, and it definitely adds a new dynamic to the level of villain that you're fighting because, or to employ a reference from the Dark Knight in the Batman movie trilogy, like, and I'm paraphrasing, but not all men have rhyme or reason. Some men just want to see the world burn. And to me, to some level, that kind of fits the main villain. It's like, he just doesn't really care for much. He just wants what he wants, and the rest of the world he doesn't care about if it doesn't fit with what he wants. So if you wanted to burn down a city, he doesn't care. If you wanted to help people, he doesn't care. What he cares about is, does it interfere, or does it attract or the thing that he wants, or does it bring the person he wants to fight to him, or does it make it easier for him to go to the person? That's all he cares about. He wants a challenge, which I can kind of relate on at some level, but not for the reasons he wants it. And other characters, it kind of makes you wonder, like, like what happened to them that made them so distasteful of their own people? Like, what makes them hate them so bad? And some of the stories do get revealed, and it's understanding when some characters manage to overcome that. Others don't really get redeemed, and others, they find redemption in a way that you don't really expect. And it makes for such a dynamic story that, like, I really don't feel like I can get into it without having major spoilers beyond that. And then, or we get into the lead up that is, or to Shadowbringers, in the story of Shadowbringers, and leading up to it, or when the main cast is trying to figure out what's going on with the Empire falls into chaos towards the end of the expansion, and or it seems to end in a stalemate, or which the Alliance, being Eorzea, or Eorzea and the Far East, want to push forward into the Empire, but or with the Scions, or at this point they're calling them Archons because that's a title related to Charlian. I think that's going to become a bigger element in the next expansion. I don't really know yet, but they just start dropping like flies. I mean, it starts with one, then another, and of course, there's no rhyme or reason. Reason of this voice is saying, "Hey, we need you. Come here, focus." And it doesn't work for the person he's wanting to pull, which is obviously the player character. So everyone else is dropping like flies, and you don't really know why. And the last one that drops is like, please don't fall. And ironically, they're the one that ends up dropping first. And then finally, you get the message that, hey, I need you to come here, come to this place, grab this item. It will help me focus. And or after investigation, you realize your friends aren't dead, but something is bad wrong. You need to figure out what it is, and that voice is the only lead you have. So you have to follow them into the first reflection of Eorzea. Now, one thing I will show here. Oh. I completely forgot what I'm doing here. Okay, so. Just the map of the world. that's the map of Shadowbringers. And the map of Eorzea. They literally are reflections of each other. The only difference is the names or in the city-state layouts. But they are literally reflections of each other. So when you see this giant wall around it, which is basically cut off the rest of the world, which fits the narrative. And that's where Garlemald would have been up here in this area. And you can see a lot of it's just inaccessible, called the Empty. As a reason. And it ties back to Realm Reborn. Where a lot of the stories that were set up there, particularly with the Warriors of Darkness, they come to a head here. And it makes sense on why things are happening the way they were. And eventually, or you take care of it, you literally save the world. I mean, not really a shock there, that's ultimately how it ends. And you have to return to the problem of getting your friends back to where they came from because they start collapsing again. But this time, because there's a different reasoning. And it's amazing how they resolve that, as they don't. Part of them doesn't want to leave, even though they know they have to, otherwise they're going to, or literally become nothing. Their bodies are back in the main zone will just literally die, and their spirits, which are here, will fade away. The only one that can transition that rift, hale and whole, is your character. And in finding out more about the Ascians over the course of this expansion, with their motivations just being not that fundamentally different, or at least the core Ascian group, they kind of want to save their world the same way you're saving your worlds. They want to continue living like you want to continue living, but they want to get their old world back, and we can kind of relate to that. Though their methods and their ideals, they are inherently incompatible. But there is that sliver of common ground of wanting to make the future better. The difference mainly lies in the vision of that future. One vision being or within the past, the other vision being or within literally the future itself. Saying, hey, this is what we are, we need to make the best of it. The other saying, our best is in our past, we need to recreate it for the future. And that conflict, I think, embodies the difference between light and dark in a figurative sense. Because quite literally, when you first start the game, this world is bathed in light. And it kind of gives you that eerie, foreboding feeling when you first set foot in the world. Only later find out the light is too much of either is a really bad thing, because you already go to another reflection of the world that became the void. And that was the 13th reflection. The first reflection, however, became light-bathed and almost slammed back into Eorzea. We found out that rejoinings are what causes the calamities. And they're happening with etherical instability based on the element that actually permeates the one that slams back into the source. In the 13th case, it was void. In the first case, it was about to be light. And there are 6 or 5 other calamities, or 6 others, that you can research if you really want to know more about it. But that's what accounts for all the umbral calamities in the source, is rejoinings. And they were about to have another one that was light-based and caused all sorts of chaos to happen, which would have ultimately led to the death of your player character in that alternate timeline. Because now we're in uncharted territory, we don't know what's going to happen. And just overall, the story, I don't want to go into much more of that because it's something you need to experience. And as a former World of Warcraft player, the level of storytelling is just, it's night and day. I mean, you take any 2 cutscenes from Final Fantasy, compare them to World of Warcraft, or in recent memory, we're not talking like Wrath of the Lich King, Legion, or before, we're talking like Battle for Azeroth and retail. The only story in Warcraft I can compare what's been going on here as far as depth and actually caring about the characters is, or the lead up, or to the final Mat Gora between Varrock Sarfang and Sylvanas Windrunner. That's the only one thing you can compare. And the only reason it compares is because you care. Well, up to that point, you kind of understood why Sylvanas was wanting to do what she wanted to do. You had some clues, especially if you read the novel, which is its own issue I'll get into later. But you kind of understood that she was building up to something. She was relatable, and she was at least somewhat doing it in the name of the Horde. But Varrock Sarfang understood that you can't do this. This is not good for us as a people. We can't live perpetually in war. We have to break the cycle. And so he challenged her in a way that would end the cycle, but not end in bloodshed. For many, it would just literally be one life. He knew he wasn't going to defeat her, but he exposed her, so in a literal sense, he won before that fight ever started, because he exposed her for what she was, and she just dropped the ball. But you cared because you didn't want him to die, even though you knew he was going to. A lot of the characters that ultimately pass away within Final Fantasy, you care about to that same level, even though they are indeed side characters, like Harshaphon. I mean, it hurt when he died at the end of Heavensward. A lot of the characters that die, or they hurt because you genuinely care about them. When the main characters finally leave the First to go back to the source, I mean, those farewells are heartfelt, and you kind of feel bad for them. You feel like you're part of the adventure, and that's something I can't say I've seen in World of Warcraft for years. And if Final Fantasy had the same budget and resources that World of Warcraft does, I can't imagine what stories he would come up with, how things would feel and look. As you actually feel like you're part of the world in Final Fantasy. In Warcraft, you're just a lackey. I mean, you're there experiencing somebody else's story, and it's a story not being very well told. That's the best way I can describe the fundamental difference between these two. And as a World of Warcraft player who has made the transition, I don't want to go back right now. Or Final Fantasy, for me, has raised the bar so much in quality of storytelling, in quality of vision, in quality of product, that I understand why the digital hobby sold out, because they probably didn't expect it to blow up this big. And that's a good thing, because that means that Final Fantasy has a lot more places to go, a lot more room to grow. Because for Warcraft, they sat on their heels, they're putting their thumbs in their ears, and they're saying, man, we don't know what's going on, what's wrong with our game, and they're basically just letting the... Well, if I was to put it in the scene from Final Fantasy, it's where Gotetsu is trying to save Yotsuyu, or let his friends get out, or while the whole building is collapsing after that fight. Even though he's not really trying to save her, he's trying to make sure his friends get out, but ultimately saves Yotsuyu. But the whole building is literally coming down around him, and it's collapsing, and he's barely holding it up and saying, hey, get out of here, go! And at the end of it, you kind of think he's going to die, and in a real sense, he does for a long time. So, that's kind of what it feels like. And maybe Warcraft will actually pull it out, or maybe they won't. At this point, I'm more content to wait and see and just watch things happen. And in my mind, World of Warcraft as a story ended with Legion at this point. Battle for Azeroth was a what-if scenario in my head, and Shadowlands is just fan fiction in my head in terms of where it falls in the story. That's the best way I can describe it. For Final Fantasy, I just hit level 80 a few days ago. I've been doing the post-story, and I am genuinely excited for where Endwalker is going to take the story. Because the trailer makes sense to me now. All the elements line up. I understand why it what's happening is happening. I've still got two patches to go, and I look forward to those. So, a final message for all you Warcraft players who might be hesitant to make the transition. Two pieces of advice as a former WoW player. One, don't bring your method of playing the game over with you. Because wall attacks and just skipping it and going out and collecting things and coming back and killing things coming back, yeah, some of the quest elements are going to be derivative, true, but the story is where it makes a difference. You have to be open-minded to actually playing the story as intended. Not skipping scenes, but, actually understanding the story, like your class, the area, your zone, like the expansion. All the stories interconnect in a way that comes up with a beautiful narrative, cinematics and all. But you have to give yourself time. Unlike Warcraft, the true game is not in-game. The whole game is the game. The leveling experience matters as much as in-game. You have to come in with that mindset. Second piece of advice, don't rush the experience. It is going to take time. You are not going to get to level 80 in a week. And if you do, you could do it, but I do not recommend that. Because if you do, you are missing out on 90% of the game. Because, like I said, this game requires time, it requires patience, it requires story. You have to treat it like you kind of would for a movie. You have to dedicate the time to just going through it at the pace it wants you to. That doesn't mean or you can't enjoy things like flying or do things like that. But the story, you have to understand the cutscenes are playing in a way that they are supposed to. There are a few side stories that are must do. So treat them like main story quests, but it's kind of like filler episode. Some of them are good, some of them aren't. But the ones that are required, there's a reason they are required. You have to bear that in mind and treat them with the same pacing that you would the story. That is my advice for World of Warcraft players. Give it a shot, but leave the World of Warcraft standard of play in World of Warcraft. Treat Final Fantasy like the story it is, and you'll have a much better experience. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap up this Shadowbringers and Stormblood end review up to a close, and I hope to hear from you all soon. So please like, comment, subscribe. It will greatly help the channel grow, and I hope to hear from you next episode.